Good afternoon. We are here for our workshop. So we will start with having our our council take a roll call to establish a quorum.
Thank you, President Craighead. Member Lopez?
Present.
Vice President Otto? Here. President Craighead?
Here.
Member Benitez?
Here.
And Member Miller?
Here.
And a student member Arroyo.
Here.
Madam President, we have a quorum.
Thank you. So we will just jump right in and we'll get started, and I will hand things over to Dr. Baker.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is a wonderful opportunity to do some learning in a workshop setting, and then to take a break and go into our regularly scheduled board meeting. So I am pleased this afternoon to call up Dr. Lucy Salazar and Mr. George Tsai, and to introduce the item that is on the agenda, the Local Control Accountability Plan LCAP update. So to be clear, we are required, it is a compliance item, to provide a report to the Board of Education at the mid-year point on our LCAP spending and some of the highlights that are the activities within the context of the LCAP. So today is purely an opportunity for you to hear from Dr. Salazar and Mr. Tsai about some of those activities, for you to receive the report that you can take away with you and take a look at if you're interested in the activities and the goal areas. You'll notice in the report, and you're going to get an overview, that there are some areas where there is data to report and other areas where there isn't. That is based on the goals and the metrics that are in the LCAP. So they will provide a high-level highlight. This is a comprehensive report, and so today's session is purely an opportunity to be acclimated to that report and to receive some of those highlights. So I will turn it over to Dr. Salazar.
This afternoon. And like Dr. Baker said, we're here to present the 2025 mid-year LCAP update on our Local Control Accountability Plan, or LCAP. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce the team for this year. I'm grateful to have the following collaborators work alongside with me as we develop and get to adoption in June our LCAP for this coming year. And so, as Dr. Baker mentioned, we have George Tsai, who is the Assistant Director of State and Federal Programs. And we also have Carmen Hernandez, who's also in Equity Engagement and Partnerships with us. But new to LBUSD, and maybe not new anymore to many of you, we also get the joy of working alongside Executive Director of Fiscal Services, Margaret Lamb, and you'll hear from her in a little bit. So, as Dr. Baker mentioned, this update provides an overview of our progress on the plan so far that was adopted last June by the board. And we'll be able to share not only the goals, but we'll also get to chance at the mid-year point, let you know what have been the expenditures, have the plan been implemented, and also some of the metric data that we have at this point. With the understanding that this LCAP was designed in mind with not only the board goals and the superintendent's goals, but also our Vision 2035 and the strategic plan. So for some background, it's important to note that the mid-year is a requirement of California Education Code, and it's required that we do this presentation before February 28th, and that we do so to the governing board. And so it serves as a checkpoint midway of programs and services, again, that were approved in the LCAP last year. Some of the data you will see is unavailable due to the metrics happening before this presentation has occurred. So as an example, our student and parent core survey closes tomorrow, so you won't see any of the data that relates to the core survey. Equally, there are some summative data points that we don't have yet, either because they are still in progress, as the SBAC happens at the end of the year, but we do have some analysis of last year's SBAC that you will see, but there will also be some areas in which you won't see that. So just to let you know, but before we get started, before we go into some of the, not only the metrics, but also the plan implementation, I want to call Margaret up so she can share with you some additional information.
Good afternoon, members of the governing board, Superintendent Baker, and valued members of the community. Today, I'm pleased to present the Budget Parent Overview, which provides the snapshot of the Local Control Accountability Plan at the mid-year mark. The succeeding slide outlines the local funding formula allocation and offers a general overview of our spending as of December 2024. Our goal is to provide insight on how resources are being utilized to currently support student success in our district priorities. Sorry. There. This slide highlights the LCFF funding as well as the supplemental and concentration grant as we go through the normal budget cycle. If you noted, like last June, the board adopted the LCAP plan, and with it comes the local control funding formula calculation. So during that time, the state hasn't enacted its budget yet, so we had to go back to board in August. One good thing is that it remained relatively stable. The June to August LCFF revenue and supplemental and concentration grant revenue remains the same. In first interim, which is last December, there was a slight change in the supplemental and concentration grant, and that is because we submitted the CalPADS unduplicated count in December, which shows up a slightly lower unduplicated count percentage for the district. And then the last column shows what we anticipate to be the LCFF revenue in this coming second interim, which we are going to formally present to the board in March of next month. So that one shows a slight increase, and that's because our TK ADA, which we submitted the first principal apportionment ADA last January, was slightly higher, and TK is funded based off of the annual ADA, so we had a slightly better number for better revenue number for TK. It's about 800,000. And then the next slide shows the local control accountability plan is structured primarily based off of 9 goals that is aimed at fostering student success and equity. This slide presents the mid-year expenditure, which is shown in yellow bar, and then the budgeted amount, which is part of the LCAP last June, which is in the green or blue, depending on your, depending on how you see the color. I think it's technically teal. So it's based off of, like, it shows the 9 the 9 primary goals, which is high quality learning instruction with about 224 million of expenditures, Black student achievement, accelerated achievement for English learners, high quality learning for students with disability, high quality learning for foster and homeless youth, cultivating authentic family partnership, promoting culturally affirming education, inclusive and future-ready education, and accelerated learning for Reed High School and Educational Partnership High School. So the accompanying chart provides an overview of the LCAP fund and the expenditures today. But it is important to note that some of our expenditure might not have yet materialized. As many of our expenditure in a school district, typically the July and August months are very low expenditure months. So our expenditure normally happens in September through June. A good example on this is Goal 4. If you notice that Goal 4 has about Goal number 4, sorry. Goal 4 has a budget of 144, and the expenditure is only at 10. This is because it includes our support to the special education program, which typically we don't calculate until the end of the year. It's not that we're not doing anything. I assure you that the special ed program is in progress, and it's working really hard to, to achieve our goal for the year, but that expenditure might not have shown up yet because of just like technical accounting, transfers that we have to do. So as you will hear from Dr. Salazar, we are making significant progress in implementing the programs and initiative outlined in the LCAP. At this time, I will turn back the presentation over to Dr. Salazar, who will discuss mid-year implementation and outcome data.
All right, so thank you, Margaret. So as Margaret shared, let's get started with how it's going. So let's take a closer look at those 9 LCAP goals that Margaret was able to share with us. So for each goal, we're going to review the mid-year expenditures from July through December 2024 and the implementation. And in this chart that you see towards the bottom, you'll see that starting from the left to the right, each goal, so this is how each of the 9 slides that follow will look. So there will be the name of the goal along with how much of the budget was allocated for that particular goal. You will also see actions in the mid-year implementation. You'll be able to, I'll want to emphasize that all actions have started. So they are all in progress. There's no action that is being delayed for any particular reason. They are all up and running, if you will. The next column are the actions. And so all actions in the current L plan, they'll be listed, as well as in the final column, you'll see what have been the expenses up to date. So for goal 1, high quality learning for instruction, we see that all actions are in progress. This goal was budgeted at $520 million, and it's our largest goal with 9 actions. And as of December, we have spent approximately 42%, or as Margaret shared, $224.3 million, and we are on track in spending with the focus on instruction. And some of the key investments that you'll notice in some of the actions include professional development for enhanced classroom instruction, literacy support, as well as our wellness centers. Moving on to goal 2, which is high quality learning for Black student achievement, is the full name of this goal. You'll see how much has been allocated there in the bottom of the first column. And we see also that this action also is in progress. And with a $2 million budget, it has 31% of its funds spent. And it's an exciting aspect of this goal is the planned opening of the Center of Black Student Excellence that will happen this spring. And once that center is activated, we anticipate much more spending through the programming that is planned. Goal 3, we see it's the high quality learning for English learners, or ELs, and long-term English learners, LTELs. And this goal intends to accelerate achievement for English learners and has all of its actions in progress. And with a $4 million budget for this year, it has spent 41% of its budget. Some of the key investments in this goal are expanded EL supports and targeted professional learning. Likewise, the continued use of tools such as Elevation to help us keep track of our EL students and our LTELs and be able to disaggregate data that way. Also, Lexia and Rosetta Stone, again, to enhance EL programming. Goal 4, it's high quality learning for students with disabilities. This goal, budgeted at $144 million, also has all its actions in progress. That's important to note because, as Margaret mentioned, it only reflects a small portion of it being spent so far, but we also anticipate that by the end of year, we will be able to have the expenses reflected in this budget. Key investments for this goal are providing special education teachers, of course, classroom aides, transportation services, but also the expansion of early learning speech therapy, for example, at our Buffum Center, alternative communication strategies for early learners, and enhancing communication and linguistic skills for students. Goal 5 is high quality learning for foster and homeless youth, and it has a $1 million budget, and it has spent 40% of its budget. This was perhaps the easiest math for me to do. And it has one action, and of course it's in progress, and a key investment in this is expanding access to mental and academic services for our students experiencing either homelessness and or in foster care. Goal 6, my favorite, is cultivating authentic family partnerships, and it has a $9 million budget, and we have spent approximately 50% of its budget at the mid-year point. So also we are on our way, and we are on track to spending. All actions are in progress, and some of the key investments, of course, that I can easily go on and on about are enhanced parent university workshops, expanded ways in which we are engaging with our parents through parent leadership sessions. Goal 7 is promoting culturally affirming education, which is another large goal that has 7 actions, and all of them are in progress. And with 44% of its $103 million budget spent, some of its key investments include restorative justice practices that are being implemented in our schools, instruction and intervention coordinators, which are very well loved at our school sites across our district. And also, they also help coordinate tiered systems of supports within school systems, within our schools. But also enhancing our music program district-wide and to support specifically our unduplicated students. And as a reminder for all of us that are here who are our unduplicated students in California, they are students who are either English learners, students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch, and or foster youth. Goal 8, and we're here is where our goal is ensure inclusive and future-ready education, and with a budget of $136 million, it has spent over $45 million, or 33%. The majority of the expenditures are to provide essential services and, of course, maintenance of our buildings. But some other key investments within this goal are PD plans for staff, both certificated and classified. So not forgetting about our classified staff and doing a lot of great work to build capacity within our classified employees. And goal 9 might need a little bit more of an explanation, just as a reminder. So goal 9 is accelerate learning for all students. And particularly in this case, we're talking about students at Reed High School and EPHS, or Educational Partnership High School. The goal 9 addresses how the equity multiplier funds are allocated. And in total, the goal has $6 million, whereas actions 9.2 and 9.3 call out the 2 schools that are receiving these equity multiplier funds. And so as a reminder, last year during the LCFF, or the local control funding formula, the equity multiplier funds were provided as additional funding to school districts so that they can allocate them to the schools with highest needs. And the way it was determined which are the schools with highest needs, it was 2 things. The first thing was student mobility, or non-stability rates had to be at 25% or more, meaning there was a lot of transiency within that school. The second was there had to be social economically disadvantaged pupil rates greater than 70%. And so within our district, those 2 schools met that criteria. And so we are required to document the efforts to improve student outcomes at these schools, beginning with this year's LCAP plan. And overall, in this goal, there has been 33% of its budget spent. Okay, so let's talk about metrics. And here it says metric outcomes are either known, in progress, or unknown at this point in the school year. So please, again, be reminded that some of the data points are not available at the mid-year of the school year. So for example, I gave the example earlier that we have several metrics that are summative in nature or have not been completed. And again, an example would be the window for completing the parent and student core survey closes tomorrow. So we don't have that data today. But it all will be available and made available in the final report. So there will be no unknowns in our final reporting. So let's go back to our first goal, which is high quality learning for instruction. And now we're looking at the metrics. So if you remember, this was our largest goal, so it has the most amount of metrics. And so in the next 4 slides are dedicated just to goal 1 metrics, because there are 19 metrics for goal 1. They include SBAC, ELA, and math for all subgroups of students, and college and career readiness metrics, and for example, iReady is one of them. So what we see here is an improvement for all students meeting or exceeding standards in SBAC and ELA. However, ELA remains to be a challenge that we need to continue to address with our economically disadvantaged students and our ELs. Likewise, we show that math gains happens for all our subgroups, while our 12th graders showed that there was a decrease in their SBAC science. On this next slide, which really kind of talks to the college and career readiness metrics, because it includes items such as A through G requirements, CTE pathway data, and ready for college screening. We continue to see that on this slide, we are trending in the positive or the direction that we want to be trending in. And I'm going to kind of go quicker through these next two slides because I believe they are fairly self-explanatory. But I do want to highlight on this very last metric, on the last slide for goal 1, is the measure 1.15. And the reason I want to call attention to this is because it had called for the development of interdisciplinary units of study for the elementary and middle schools, and intended was a goal of having 6 units developed. But as you can see, they have our Department of OCIPD, Office Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development, has well exceeded that goal of developing 6 units. So I just want to mention that. So as a highlight for that slide. Let's talk about goal 2, high quality learning for Black student achievement. And this has 6 metrics. And some of the highlights here are measure 2.2 on the second row. We see that there was a baseline originally in our LCAP, which is a 3-year plan, by the way. And we are just now looking at maybe not even a full year. We're looking at 6 months of within the first year of the LCAP. And so our baseline by the year 26, 27, we say that we want it to be at 66%. And so our baseline was 44 on measure 2.2 of students A through G eligible who are now at 50%. And so we do see that there was an increase of 6.4%. Another highlight is the A through G eligible gap has decreased by 5.6%. So one of the things that we want to keep an eye out is in the gap, we want to see negative numbers. That's the direction we want to go with gaps. We want to see a reduced gap or a reduction in gap. All right, goal 3. Goal 3 has 6 metrics, and some of the highlights at this mid-year check-in are measure 3.2. We have exceeded the LCAP target of 10% that we set out by the year 26, 27. So when we reached the increase of 3.2% more students redesignated, this has helped us meet our goal quite quickly. So now we have a new task, right? Now we have to keep that trending in the positive direction, but we also have to set a new goal, right? We may have set it a little low, and now we got to set it higher. Measure 3.6. We also see a reduction in the gap between EL and student grad rates. And however, there's still more work needed to be done so that we can reduce the proportion of students that are LTELs and ELs. And also another reminder that while some of the data is unavailable, it will be updated and available by the end of the final reporting. Goal 4 has 5 metrics, as you can see. And some of the things that we can highlight are measure 4.2, where our target for the year 2026-27 was 2.4. We're currently at 2.1. And so we hope to trend positively and continue to do so in this metric. I forgot to read the goal. The goal is high quality learning for students with disabilities. All right, goal 5. This has 7 metrics, and the goal is high quality learning for foster and homeless youth. Measure 5.5, where the LCAP target was at 2.8% by the year 2026-27 for suspension rates. We are currently at 3.1, so we are again trending in the right direction. And goal 6. Goal 6 is cultivate authentic family partnerships. Here's a perfect example of data that is not available. All this data is coming from either our student core survey or our parent core survey, which closes tomorrow. So of all the goals to not have data, right? All right. So goal 7. Goal 7 is promote culturally affirming education. It's our second largest goal with the second largest amount of metrics. This has 14 metrics altogether. And so this first slide shows that on measure 7.1, there has been an increase in attendance rates, and I'm saying this with caution because it's as of December. December. Now we know that with the change and some of the hardships that our communities are facing, this will be impacted. And so an area for continued improvement as well is our middle school and high school dropout rates. And on this second slide for goal 7, I want to highlight where we have measure 7.12. There isn't a gain and there isn't a loss. And so what this means is that there's no gain or no loss when looking at students on track for meeting A through G requirements. And that's as of today, and so we remain at 56%. That being unchanged is also an area for us to grow in. And our goal, our target goal by the year 26-27 is 68%. Goal 8, inclusive and future-ready education. This has 4 metrics. And so what something to note here is that goal measure 8.3, where we have compliance with instructional materials, we're at 100%, and that is probably very familiar to you because earlier this year at a board meeting, you certified that we were 100%, all students have all the instructional materials that are needed in our classrooms. Goal 9 has 7 metrics, and so we have 2 slides. As you recall, this is the equity multiplier slide. This is where it shows Reed High School and EPHS and the metrics that we have for the equity multiplier. And so the data reflects that there is still much work to be done for our graduation rates and our college and career metrics that are reflected here. And however, on the next slide, you see that we have decreased suspension rates at Reed. And so that's something that we're excited for. Okay, I am going to continue. Okay, I'm going to continue. So, but thank you for your attentive participation so far. And so where are we now, right? So that concludes the mid-year report on our LCAP for 24-25 as it was adopted last June. But we are gearing up and we're getting ready to develop the 25-26 LCAP for next year. And so again, we want to be able to invite our community to engage with us. You'll see that we have a QR code. We also have our website, which is lbschools.net/LCAP. And on that website and with this QR code, we are launching our thought exchange for this school year. And you will also be able to see on Friday our engagement calendar. And the reason I bring that to us today is because we're asking a specific question of our community. And we're hoping that if you're watching, if you're here in your networks, that you encourage community members to engage with us in the LCAP development. And what we're asking this year is, as we develop next year's LCAP, what programs, what service, or supports do you believe will have the most impact on student success in Long Beach Unified School District? And so we always appreciate the collaboration and the support of all our educational partners, both within the district and outside of the district. And so there's a call to action. Your participation is vital. And by getting involved, you get an opportunity to share your perspectives. You get to help us prioritize programs and services for next coming school year, either for your children, for your neighbors, for your community. If you're not able to scan that code, again, I'm encouraging you to go to our webpage, lbschools.net/LCAP, LCAP. And often I'm asked, well, why don't you share why it's so important? Why is it important for our community to get involved in this process? And so, as I mentioned earlier, you are helping us determine how funding can be allocated to support our students. Through your engagement, parents, caregivers, students, because we will be out talking to students, and community members will help us ensure that we are getting the priorities right, that we are developing programming and services and providing resources that are much needed based on the feedback that we receive through this thought exchange. And so again, help us set the priorities that are going to impact student success. How you do it. Once you log on to our webpage, or if you're watching us, you can scan the QR code. You'll be asked a variety of questions. You'll ask 3 identifying questions. You know, what school are you most associated with? You'll be asked about ethnicity, and you'll be asked what is your role within our community? Are you a staff member? Because we're encouraging our staff to do this as well. Are you a parent? Are you a community member? Are you a student? And after that, you'll be prompted to our question. Well, you'll have an opportunity to share your thought, but then you'll also be able to see the thoughts of others. So we encourage you to come back often to see what are people up to? What is the community up to? What are they saying? And be able to rate that, because the more you rate those thoughts, then that helps elevate them as a priority within our community. So just join the conversation. It's important. You do make a difference. We are listening. And so with that, here's our engagement schedule. We're currently in phase 1. We are here. We're sharing with you not only this update, but also talking about what we will be doing. Something else that our community can expect to see on that same webpage are updates around the work that we're doing in the LCAP development process. And so we will provide we'll send it home through School Messenger. We'll make paper copies available at schools because we know not everyone accesses information the same way. And in phase 2 is where we'll continue to gather the input and start drafting the LCAP. And something that we'll do specifically in phase 2 is propose a draft and release it on our online. And we'll ask for our community to give us feedback on that first initial draft of the LCAP for next year. And there will be a way for them to give us specific feedback. And then Dr. Baker will have an opportunity to respond to the feedback so that we can get to phase 3, which is where we are finalizing the LCAP so that we can bring it to you in June. To share with you a final version of the draft, and then eventually we hope for an adoption of the LCAP plan. And lastly, we want to leave you with this thought. LBUSD remains steadfast in its commitment to student success and well-being. We continue to advance equitable, high-quality learning experiences that empower our students to reach their full potential. We recognize and appreciate the dedication of our educators, the partnership with our families, and the resilience of our students. Together, we are shaping a future where excellence and opportunity are within reach for all. And so I just want to say thank you and take questions.
Thank you. Who would like to start out with questions? Mr. Miller.
So my question is actually small and probably, let's say maybe a bit premature, but I'm curious. So when I looked at the expenditures component, this is at page 5, and maybe I'm using my own personal experience in contrast to the functionality of the district, but I'm just sharing my thoughts here, is that there are a couple of our budgeted amounts that are technically not at the same 50% mark as we would like. Mm-hmm. And so for me, at least when I think about when I've run some larger organizations, it was easier for me to ramp down than it was for me to speed up, right, when it comes to spending. And so I really have some cause for pause when it comes to not spending the amounts that we've budgeted, because I feel that it could be the potential of shortchanging the resources for our students and for our teachers. And so I just wanted to make sure that that's not where we are. Obviously, that's not. But I wanted to make sure that we maybe have a plan in some of the ones that have some larger gaps in regards to how much we've spent to how much are budgeted. And so I was hoping you could maybe speak to, or maybe there was some conversation around like our students, goal 4, goal 8, and obviously in goal 1.
For goal 8, okay. And we're going to bring Margaret back up.
So right now, when you look at all the action, it's actually averaging at about 42-43% for all the different goals. And it's mostly because we're looking at the months of July, August, September, October, and December. So technically, like of the school year, what's really like, the first really full month in a school year is normally the October. That's where your expenditure is in full. So like you'll have a full month of September, October, December, and then you have a July and August that is relatively, it's very low, especially with what we're using, because it's mostly in the core, like during the school year that it happened. So that's why it's about 40%. And then for the goal 4, we have like out of the 144, about 120 million is for special ed support, this is from the base. You know, how like our special ed, we have a program that's funded by federal and state, and then we support it because we believe that, like, you know, we have to do what's right with our special ed students. So we have to give them support of about 120 million a year. And normally that support is not calculated until the end of the year, because what we would do is we would look at the revenue for the year and the actual expenditure, and that's the only time that we would technically transfer out the support.
That makes sense. So it's not represented here, so that,
Yes.
got it. Got a little worried? No, I'm kidding. I didn't get worried. Thank you.
Dr. Benitez?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and the time and thoughtfulness. I have a couple quick questions and then a broader question for the team. So we started off, I'll just go to slide 4 on my deck. Not sure if that coincides exactly with the PowerPoint, but if it does, it's the slide where there was a slight difference in our district's unduplicated pupil percentage. Could we talk about a little bit more about like what that difference was, sort of what we account for it? Yeah. I know that we need our caregivers and families to return that information. So I know that was one of our big sort of pushes last year. So if we could just talk a little bit about why we had that slight difference, and again, equate that to meaning that we're projecting to receive less money because of that.
Yeah. So the slight decrease from the August to the October to the December one, which is the first interim, is because our unduplicated count unduplicate per pupil rate. We anticipate that it was going to be at 64.48% when the budget was developed, but then when it comes to the first interim, it dropped to 64.39. I know it's a small drop, but every single drop, because of the way that supplemental and concentration formula works, it significantly drops. If you look at our out years, we're actually we've seen a trend where the unduplicated per pupil rate is actually decreasing on a year-to-year level, which we could talk about maybe some more in the second interim, but that's the trend right now. It's about 63.7. That's what we're anticipating in the out years. And this one, for the unduplicated pupil, so that's why our alternative income form that we send out to all parents, and we do it every single year, is very critical in ensuring that we have that our supplemental and concentration funding remains high or remains sufficient to support all the programs that we're using it for.
Yep, thank you. So a budget-related a question, and I could just be off on my rough math or maybe not understanding the budget here. First off, I appreciate the budget broken down by goal, and kind of sharing to Mr. Miller's observation where we're at right now and what was in relation to our overall budget for that goal. I think I noticed a difference between what I'm roughly calculated, again, I could be off with the math, about $960.6 million between our total funds and our additional concentration supplemental grants, versus the overall, over the 9 goals, came out to roughly $925 million. So just wondering the difference in roughly $35 million.
Yes. So what we presented in the budget parent overview is only the local control funding formula revenues. So when we are developing LCAP as a district, we normally would look at the entire district budget and then identify the baseline, like some of the budget that is supporting that specific goal. So it could be more than the local control funding formula. So in the very initial phase in June, normally budget parent overview, we would present the entire general fund budget and then broke it down. This is the LCFF portion, this is the federal, this is the state, and this is the supplemental and concentration. And when LCAP goals and actions are developed, we look at it from its entirety and then pull out. So that's why the total is about 935, which is higher than the local control funding formula revenue.
So it might be helpful to just kind of show, and we've done it in the past, right, when we're leveraging other, That, Dr. Baker, the
Yes,
pyramid.
the pyramid, yes.
Sorry, she's holding up the pyramid where it has a breakdown. Again, just for our purposes, but also for our community, because it could be perceived as we're not spending that money when in fact we're leveraging funds and then allowing for discretion and flexibility with some of these funds, right? So I'd really appreciate it if we could sort of come back to that.
Yes.
Because it also shows our commitment to our most underserved, our most vulnerable populations, that we're finding ways within the overall budget to invest in those areas that we have some flexibility.
Yes,
in.
it's also on that note. It's also very important to note that like the district is actually investing about 140 million in the contributing services
Right.
for our unduplicated count, whereas our total supplemental and concentration revenue is about only 130 million.
Were you going to add something, Dr. Baker?
I was just going to say, we really like knowing when a tool is helpful to you all. So we'll add that to the beginning of our
Yes.
budget season.
Last question is around sort of what do we take from this mid-year report, given that in some areas we look promising, in others we're not quite where we want to be, and we're sort of in the second half of February here. So my question is around those goal areas where either data isn't available at this time or just the turnaround and getting it in the presentation was hard, Dr. Salazar. So for data that is not yet available, and I know you said the core survey closes tomorrow, I think you said, in those areas, then how do we know what we're doing? How do we know whether we're seeing what we want to see or whether we're hitting our marks and making progress? And my question is sort of twofold. That is part of it, but also wonderings on, is there any other data? We had this discussion around our board goals that we could think about or use, because then we're left with, we're not gonna see as a board data until that second interim report. So in those areas where we yet don't have data, could we think about what, maybe we don't have the core survey, because I think it's tough, right? And at least from my count, 5 of our goals, in some of those goals, we just don't have data yet.
So I'll address, maybe I'll start with the second question and then go back to your first question around, so how do we know along the way? And so I think one of the things that's really important to note is there's always additional data. We call it, formative assessments. We call it formative data. We don't wait just to make decisions on instruction and programming around summative data. We take a look at, what is happening along the way and being smart consumers of data that's always in front of us, right? Teaching the students we have in front of us, not the students that we had or the students that are yet to come, but the ones we have in front. And so with that said, I know that through our Office of Curriculum and our level offices, they are constantly talking about where are we with our data. Now, it may not always make the light of day, but it's not to say that data is not always considered. From my perspective for goal 6, yes, absolutely, we have additional data, and we have through our program community facilitators, we're using a thought exchange, and so they're collecting their own data at their own school sites around engagement and impact of the sessions that they are providing at their school sites, so that we have additional data. The way we have written the LCAP, though, with the metrics, that's the metrics that we're presenting today, but it's not to say that it's the only data we have. And just to remind us all that these metrics are also in line with board goals. They're also in line with Dr. Baker's goals and our visioning. And so that's one, that's just to answer is there additional data? Yes. And yes.
Yeah, Dr. Salazar, if I may. This is actually, it's really interesting, this conversation, especially when we think about later this evening, we're going to be talking about our board goals and our update on our board goals. And I think sometimes, so what we have here is a very comprehensive plan that is required by the state. It has everything that the state requires, and we have these goals related to that. And we're going to talk later today about the narrowing into some really intentional board goals. And beyond what's here and beyond the board goals, there is a plethora of data that our sites are utilizing, as Dr. Salazar said, on an ongoing basis. It might be our pulse survey that's given 3 times a year. that it gives similar data to the core survey that is not yet, but our sites have 2 data points already this year related to the pulse survey. It's things like, interestingly, a lot of the data here is last year's summative data that when we came and presented, Dr. Madrigal and her team came presented in August and September. In October, we talked about our action plans. We're already 70% of the way through the implementation of the action plans based on the data that you're seeing now here that we saw back in July. Okay. So I think sometimes we have to kind of remember the role of different data that we're looking at. This is like way lagging data in most cases. That is a requirement of the state. And the stuff we bring through our board goals, the stuff we talk about in our principals meetings and with our teachers, that's like the more current, more detailed, and more actionable.
So can I just ask one? Thank you, Brian. That's helpful, and I think it would be helpful for you to frame tonight's or the later data for the board goals with the context that you just provided. So for example, if I'm looking at only LCAP metrics goal 2, and I'm not trying to minimize or trivialize why I'm saying only, the A through G completion is, at least the way it's presented, seems to be in alignment with one of our board goals, right? So if I do have wonderings as to, okay, what was the data set that we utilized to report on LCAP and how that may be either the same or different from the board goals, it may appear as though we have disparate data, right? If I'm interpreting this data right now, it looks promising. If I look at, hey, reduction in our Black student A through G access and completion, that looks like a promising, 5.2% diminishing of our A through G, or if I'm looking at gap between Black, African American, and other students, M2.2, who are A through G eligible, minus 5.6% reduction in the gap looks promising. So just, again, juxtaposing that, understanding that we're using potentially different data for different purposes, just kind of walk us through that as best as you can, and also when we're presenting on LCAP data.
I mean, I'll invite others to join in as well. So first of all, Dr. Salazar, I believe, is working with our research team, yes. Dr. Madrigal and her team, to come up with this data. So it's all coming from the same source, so that's one good thing. You're right, though, sometimes the way you ask the question or the way you look for the data, you might get slightly, not different results, but you're looking from a different paradigm. One of the things that comes to mind as it relates to Goal 2 here, in March, Dr. Madrigal and her team will be bringing back data on board goals 3 and 4. And what we can do is we can be intentional about bringing in like a connection back to this so that you can see that we are talking about the same data, maybe a different point in time that we're looking at it. This is, again, summative data from last year. The board goal data we're going to bring you in March is after semester 1 of this year. So they're different points in time, but we can help you to make the connections. And it's just about data literacy for all of us, right, so that we understand what we're looking at.
Okay, did we have any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate having the information, and we're looking forward to the start of this season, especially as a result, for me, especially as it pertains to engaging with our community. I know that our community appreciates having those opportunities to give opinions and have a voice in the whole process. So it's nice to see that there are many ways for that to happen, and I'm glad you mentioned also involving our students, because they know what they need.
Yes, yes, they do.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes. So thank you. So we will move right along to the next item on our workshop agenda, which is our cell phone and social media policy development. So I know this is something that's very much in the news, and we are anxious to hear the update.
And I'm going to jump in and just welcome
Yes.
Mr. Chris Itzen and Mr. Lee Underwood. Of course, you know Chris, who is our program administrator. in communications, and Mr. Underwood is a teacher at Millikan who is known and loved. Thank you for coming off campus and being here with us this afternoon. So the title says it all, Cell Phone and Social Media Policy Development. And that is because the policy is truly in development. And the process that Chris and Lee have been partnering in with a number of others really is designed to bring forward research with practice with focus group information. So they have gone through current research. They have been looking at what's happening in other places, and most importantly, they have gone straight to our users, who are primarily young people, many of whom are teenagers. So these two gentlemen are teenage whisperers, and they have been gathering information that we are going to use to inform what we do next. And they're here today to share with you what that process will look like as they move toward a policy rollout in the spring of 2026. So thank you, Mr. Itzen, Mr. Underwood.
All right, distinguished board members, Dr. Baker, senior team, and of course our colleagues here, and then anybody watching at lbschools.net/YouTube. We're excited here to talk. Oh, give me a second. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. You guys know what we deal with all the time in comms.
Okay, I'll just fill up the gap by reminding everyone that our Millikan teacher is a former Teacher of the Year. I think that was a couple years back.
2022.
2022, okay.
Thank you for that. So, have you ever been out to lunch, or sitting with a friend, talking to somebody on the couch at work, and they pop their phone out to the side? Maybe you've done it. I can confess that I've done it. It is something that is so normal. And if we can go back to the, oh, I clicked it. That's my fault. If we can go back to my quote, I've been thinking about this quote from an MIT professor for a while, that we are forever elsewhere in our society now. We are always somewhere else because our phone is dictating our consciousness, what we're thinking about, our attention span. And it's affecting our kids in ways that are so dramatic. I have spent the last 12 years of my life being heavily invested in working in social media and digital technology, especially the last 6 school years has been everything that I'm focused on and what I do for a living. I know cell phone addiction. I carry 2 phones, so I know all about it. When we started down this process that we're going to talk about today, I did not understand the magnitude and level and impact of this problem on our kids. And I think about 2 things when I distill education down to the simplest form. It's 2 things. It's keeping our kids safe, and it's making sure they learn. If you strip it all down, right? Emotionally safe, physically safe, included, and then that they get something out of it, that they learn, that they're prepared for the future. And there is a scourge and a problem happening with this technology right now that has overran us, and we are behind, our whole country is. And now we're seeing a response, and so we're gonna talk about Long Beach Unified's unique response to this problem. So I'm going to throw some math. I'm really not a math guy. I was a history and English teacher, but I double-checked my numbers quite a bit when I was prepping this, but I want to frame some thinking. So right now, according to some modern research, we're finding that kids 13 to 18 years old are on a screen 7 hours a day just for entertainment. That's not school. About 4 to 5 is social media. Boys tend to be on less than girls overall, but about 7 hours. So if you take that and you say 7 hours per day at 365 days a year, that's 2,555 hours per year, that age group is on a screen for entertainment. And if you take that age group, 13 to 18, and you multiply that, that's 15,330 hours of their waking time on a screen for entertainment. And so let's juxtapose that with time for learning. Kids are on average, 6 hours a day in school, 180 days a year. You're looking at about 6,480 total hours in school. Obviously, that's not completely learning all the time. There's passing periods, there's lunch, but being impacted by that. So that number compared 15,000 plus of time on screen time. And it gets a little bit worse in the example. When you take that time, we use the idea of waking time. So we're going to say, hypothetically, that kids sleep 8 hours a day, right? Or a night, which that's not everybody, but let's say that. So there's 16 hours available that's waking. If you divide that up, that means from 13 to 18, 2.6 years of their life is on a screen time for entertainment. Almost half that time. That to me is terrifying terrifying to think that that is constantly all that they're focused and they're engaged, and that's where they're elsewhere. And what that has led to, we have seen, many of you know this in this room as leaders, as parents, we've seen this is happening all across our country, major issues with excessive cell phone use and inappropriate social media use that's negatively impacting our kids physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I can't see from there. I'm going to read just a few, and I don't have a lot of time today. I could teach a class on this, I feel like, and go deep, and I will answer any questions at the end. But these are the things we're seeing. Social comparison and self-esteem issues, major uptick in cyberbullying. Since the pandemic, it is out of control, and it's far worse because the social media companies do not help us at all. In 2019, I would get a complaint, or Cameron Smith would, and we would get a malicious account attacking our kids or bullying our kids. We'd get it taken down in 24 hours, no problem. I can't get them taken down anymore. Social media companies don't care. We report. They have no customer service, and they ignore us because they want faces on screens. And so we feel powerless often when we're trying to protect our kids even from cyberbullying. Sleep disruption. This is the age where part of their prefrontal cortex is still growing in, one of the most important parts of brain development and social emotional development. And that blue screen and that screen time is negatively affecting their sleep, or they're on their phones super late at night because maybe they don't have boundaries at home. That's negatively affecting them. And that one leads to I sit in all these meetings with y'all, been to everyone for the last several years, and I've heard a lot about learning loss over the last several years. And we talk about learning loss in kind of a timeline, right? Like we had the pandemic, and so we had this learning loss. We're having continual learning loss because of this technology and what it's doing to our kids. It's affecting their cognition. It's causing depression, anxiety. Anxiety and depression rates have skyrocketed since 2016, which is right about the time that the iPhone really turned into the iPhone that we have today. The early one was a lot less addictive. We've seen anxiety rates go higher and higher, and for younger and younger kids. We saw another huge increase in 2021 because our kids were at home, locked on screens all the time. We're continuing to see that problem. Distraction from real life activities. I was meeting with some of our teachers today, and one of them was sharing with me that one of their kids was having such anxiety about not having their phone because they felt disconnected. They're in person, engaging with people and connecting and learning, and they feel disconnected because they're not out here with what their phone is telling them to do. So it's affecting our kids deeply. And the extremely high potential for addiction. This is designed to be addictive. The 2007 version of this iPhone that I have didn't have a front-facing camera, didn't have the button, or it had the button on it, right? Then you'd have to type everything. Now it's got this cool camera that engages me. I can just look at it. My phone just turned on, right? I don't even have to do anything anymore. It's made for me to keep engaging. And then social media companies, they have the highest level doctors and scientists working for them to figure out ways to make this technology more and more addictive. And when I meet with kids, I say this often. I say, okay, say I work for Toyota. What product do I make? They say cars, you make vehicles. I say, okay, well, what does a social media company do? And we tease through that, and we talk through that, and we get to the point where they understand that the main way that a social media company makes its money is on advertising. So the student, so you, so me, we are the product that they're making money off of, while also damaging their mental and emotional state as well. And so when I'm talking to kids, Lee and I use the term trip on the truth and getting them to see, like, you're getting ripped off. Your future is being stolen while they're making money off of you, and they're making it more addictive. Just in the way that tobacco companies took tobacco, which was already addictive, and then added more chemicals in the 50s and 60s to make it extremely addicted. That's what's happening to our kids right now. And so because of that, there's been an outcry. We've been talking about this for a while, and everybody I talk to says, of course, cell phones are addictive, and social media is, and it's crazy, but when you really start looking into the science of what's happening, it's far worse and far more nefarious. And luckily, our state is leading the way with other states to finally do something about this. And so if you realize the governor signed AB 3216 recently, saying that we need to have a cell phone restriction plan for all of our schools by July 1st of 2026. And I went, great, this is fantastic. We need to do this. We need to come up with a way to protect our kids just as we protect them from weapons, from drugs, from tobacco, all those things. This is another thing that we can't do anything about outside of the day, but what can we do in our school to protect and keep our kids safe so that they learn? My problem with it is the governor's bill was very vague, no plan. And several schools jumped on it and they said, let's do a cell phone ban. And that terrified me because that's not going to build the support, the education, the resources, the strategic planning to do something that's effective in making a really effective policy. And so we stepped back, our comms team and several of my colleagues that are on our work group talked to senior leadership and said, can we take our time? We have great things happening. Can we look at what's happening in our system? Can we look at what's happening externally that's working and come up with something that's engaging our community so that we're all doing this together? Because it's going to take a village to really kind of get all of our kids out of this problem. And so, again, I have a short amount of time today, but this is kind of where we've been at. Like Dr. Brown said, we've been in this work for a while. So really planning and a lot of thinking prior to proposal development all the way back to the summer. And really as of October, once it was approved, we've really kind of hit the ground running. So we have a social media safety work group right now that's volunteers across the district. It's principals from each level. There are teachers, students, parents, then different support offices like restorative justice, school safety, anything that kind of touches this work, we have representatives. And we meet once a month on Zoom to kind of walk through how we're developing this process, and then there's multiple other meetings that we have. And we're researching existing practices in the system. So starting with an asset-based lens and saying what's working, because we have schools that have cell phone restrictions. We have schools that are trying these things. Some of our middle schools recently this year, shout out to Franklin, Hamilton, Stevens, and I know there's more, but that said we need to deal with this, and they engage their community, and they have a restriction plan, and it's working really well. Overall, it's doing very, very well. And so we said, well, let's go see what's happening. Let's walk classrooms. Let's see what's happening in the classroom. Let's talk to the teachers. Let's talk to the CSAs and see what are they doing that works. So as we adapt our plan, we can take those best practices. And I'll give you an example. I was at Hamilton Middle School this week, and I walked into about 8 classrooms, and I saw kids learning, engaged. I didn't see a single phone. I saw on task in a level I haven't seen in years in the classroom. I sat with teachers and said, is this working? And even teachers who had been resistant and said, I don't really care about phones, they said it's been fantastic. Instances of fighting have gone way down. Bullying has gone down just in the beginning, and the parent support has been overwhelming. So we're looking at those schools, looking at some of our different high schools. We're getting ready even to go to Avalon that has a full school restriction right now just to see what's working. We're also looking at external models. So France has been doing this for about 2 years, so looking at what's working in other nations, looking at some other districts. Our dear friends, if you didn't know, over in LAUSD down the road, they enacted their cell phone restriction plan yesterday. So this is very timely. And so we're hoping to connect with them. We're working with that to go out and see how it plays out and how we can research that this year. We're also looking at what's the education campaign and the framework for behavior guidelines and restorative practices. What's the actual nuts and bolts of the process? And I'm going to quote my dear old colleague who is with us. He just doesn't work here anymore. I'm going to say that right this time, President Craig, but Chris Eftehu, who always said, we are an educational institution. We have to educate our way out of problems. And so what is the education campaign where we're meeting with kids, we're sharing information so they understand this, we're giving the resources to parents, we're giving our teachers resources to be able to talk to their kids, administrators. I've done probably 35 presentations, I think, since August or September. Social media presentations with kids, with parents, with the Family Leadership Institute, with different teacher groups. And what we're doing is we're testing, almost like a comedian test a bit, what's the presentation that's most effective and impactful. I got to spend some days at Stevens Middle School, and I got to talk to all of their 7th graders and all of their 6th graders and share this for that perspective for them. So we're looking at what resources can we build out that we can provide over the next coming years so that parents are really aware of what's happening. And that's a big thing. When I was at Hamilton the other day, just so happened that a parent group was meeting. And so Laura Martin, the principal, said, hey, you want to talk to these parents? Great. So I stopped what we were doing at one point. I went and sat with the parents. And as I was talking it through, just the level of engagement and the fact that they wanted it. And once they understood what was happening, it blew them away, and they wanted to partner. They were ready to have that conversation. I had another one at Hamilton where I was presenting at the beginning of the year, and in the middle of it, there were 3 different parents who had little ones there, and they're trying to distract them because they're paying attention to a presentation, and they had them holding iPads. And in the middle of the presentation, each one quietly took the iPad from their kid and slid it into their backpack and put it away when they were realizing, like, oh, I didn't know this. Most people don't know really how impactful this is. And then looking, hopefully, to provide even more resources for students and families on an ongoing basis as needed. And we really want to address the ineffective support from social media platforms, which is a challenge. And so I've talked to Jack about that. Some of our folks in Talbot are really being supportive of how do we start to build an alliance with other school districts, with the county, with different folks to really lobby our government to go further with this and really push and support us in that. And really lead that charge. And then also developing a comprehensive communications plan. So as we roll this out, how do we communicate this and make sure we're actually engaging our families and connect with them? And that's something that if we don't bring them on board and we don't do that together, it's not going to work. And one thing I've seen at our middle schools, some really early adapters at some of our high schools of teachers doing innovative stuff around these restrictions, they communicated with their families early. They talked to the kids. They did countdowns. Okay, in this many days, brace, we're going to do this. And that was highly, highly effective. It wasn't just it's banned and snap your fingers and we're going to try this and cause those resistance in the classroom, which we don't want. So that's where we're going. And so the timeline is this year is really our internal and external research, our engagement of the community, gathering data. There's also surveys going out. We surveyed all of our principals. Now we're getting ready to survey our families in multiple languages and survey our students of how they feel, really looking at the social emotional side, and then surveying our teachers as well as what's working in the classroom and what concerns they have and resources they need. Then at the end of this year, our goal is to present the drafted policy to the senior team and then hopefully to you. If everything went perfectly, we would love to see it passed in July. And then next year into the fall, we're not going to implement. Next year, we will count down into the fall, build out an education campaign that's massive with the countdown, engage as much as possible with a start that second semester so that we have that time. And then that semester, we'll do an impact report where we'll study what's working and look at how it's affecting our data. Like you all say when you're challenging our district to make sure that we're increasing success rates of our kids, I firmly believe that once this is implemented and implemented right, it will have a major impact on learning. It's not the only thing. It's not the end all be all. There's other stuff, but it will have a major impact. And I want to see what happens that first semester because I think we'll see a jump. And then really from 2026 to 2029, monitoring progress. What are the new supports we need? How do we need to adapt? And if you read the law from the governor, it talks about this evolving, continuing to improve. So it's not just make a policy and then it's done because the technology keeps changing. I mean, I'm not even addressing AI, deep fakes, all the other things that are happening, right? And so it's big. And so one last thing I want to tell you that's really unique about our plan, I think, versus other school districts is we're combining cell phone restriction plan with social media safety because we want to be explicit about drawing out what are the behavior expectations for our kids, what are the supports for our staff to ensure that all of our kids are safe with this technology running so rampant. So I said a lot, as I usually do, talk way too fast, so I'm sorry. But before I take any questions, I really thought it was important. We have a lot of great folks on our team, but Lee is a dear colleague I've known from back when I taught at Millikan years ago, and he has done a lot of research on this as well, and he's just one of our teachers that he's in the classroom right now, so his perspective is so valuable on what's going to happen. So I'm going to bring him up, have him going to share, and then we'll break for questions at the end.
Thank you, and thank you for providing 90 minutes worth of presentation in 30 minutes.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. Thank you, Chris Itzen. Yeah, my name is Lee Underwood, work at Millikan High School. Familiar faces. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks for having me. The preliminary work that Chris has done with this work group and the extensive focus group work at school sites has demonstrated a clear willingness by both school administrators, teachers, parents, and students, which is really fascinating to me, to act on the serious issue of social, emotional, and academic learning loss that is occurring as a result of the cell phone addiction and distraction during school. Through discussions with my colleagues at Millikan and collaborating with members of this work group, teachers have been using their creative autonomy to develop innovative systems to control cell phone distraction in their classrooms. Many teachers I know implement various contraptions that allow students to store cell phones during class, and they report varying rates of success in staving off learning loss. Some teachers require students to place phones in backpacks with the hope that they do not reappear during class time. Some teachers are just exasperated because whatever method they try seems to lead to clever workarounds students concoct to ensure the phone remains in their hand. Teachers are doing their best to create safe, equitable learning environments, and it's commendable, really. But what we have now is an incoherent, scattershot patchwork of DIY methods for cell phone distraction control. At some school sites, there is no real consistency across classrooms, so students become confused about how they can and can't use their phones. And many teachers even allow students to use their cell phones for class curriculum, while others have a zero tolerance policy. What teachers, I think, are desperate for is a coherent, unified policy that considers a multifaceted approach to cell phone restrictions. So what I'm really here to address is what that social, emotional, and academic learning loss looks like in the classroom and on campus. And across my classes, I have noticed a clear connection between in-class cell phone distraction and academic learning loss. The more a student is sucked into their phone, the less engaged they are in the classroom, which widens the gap between those who can and do control their phone usage. Additionally, opportunities for quality student-to-student conversation is hijacked by the immediate return to screens. The opportunity cost of this over a long enough period, I'm afraid, can lead to a severe decrease in the ability to form quality social relationships. Even those few moments before class begins, or before class ends, or time during nutrition, or time during lunch, are lost to screens. If one of our goals is to build resilience in our students, to teach social and emotional intelligence, we are losing to the phones. One way that I've been able to frame my classroom is as an attentional sanctuary. Like a wildlife sanctuary protects the endangered animals from violent poachers, so too is my classroom a sanctuary from the attention economy, dead set on poaching the valuable attentional resources of my students. And I'm not under any delusion that the students won't just pull their phones out right away when they leave my class, but at least during the time they are with me, I can ensure that their attention will be focused on the academic curriculum that I argue prepares these students for a life of resilience and human flourishing. If we were to scale this idea up to the entire school day through a unified policy, we'd be able to provide a chronological break that provides 6 to 7 hours of unbroken attention and allow for our students' attentional resources to be replenished and redirected towards academic and social relationships. What I'm excited about with this work group is that everyone is willing to look far and wide, from research, from social psychology, addiction science, cognitive neuroscience, to the direct conversations with parents, teachers, and students to develop the right kind of policy. The way this district moves swiftly to address the learning loss associated with the COVID outbreak gives me hope that we can move swiftly here to address the social, emotional, and academic learning loss teachers are seeing happen in their classrooms. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you having me out here, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Benitez.
That's a lot.
Sorry.
But I think the timing is perfect. So I want to start off recognizing and appreciation that you're going slow, taking your time, and you and the team are being very thoughtful and thorough. So I'm going to just pose some questions to you and the team, Mr. Itzen, because it was only 4 years ago, seems like a long time ago, that one of the biggest challenges that we had during COVID and remote learning was the digital divide that our poorest, most vulnerable communities were experiencing, and the disproportionate negative impact that not having access to a device, not having access to a Chromebook. I mean, we literally in 1 week said, we're gonna pass out Chromebooks to address the structural deficiencies, but the huge disproportionate negative impact that not having digital technology had, and the learning loss that was causing. And here, just 4 years later, these very same devices that I would say are poorest, disability communities didn't have access to get their education is now part of the discourse as to learning loss and disengagement, when those were the only things that our poorest communities, that our students with disabilities had to access our education. As we all know, and the research shows, and you all are the experts, the highest disproportionately over-reliance on personal devices is among our poorest communities, right? Because they don't have desktops at home, they don't have other platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So my first big question is, look, our world has already decided that's the direction we're gonna go in, right? We're not gonna stop that. Our district can certainly equip itself in the best way it's possible. And that's why I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness and looking what other countries are doing. But quite frankly, again, this is more than just a cultural shift or more than reimagining and rethinking, because the minute that we have our phones, we always, as a population, have an over-reliance on, not just for educational purposes, for information, for everything. If we don't use our phones, and I'm talking about my community here, my communities, we're out. We're completely disengaged, because that is the main platform for engagement right now. So first wondering is, given that these devices that we are going to develop policies around limiting, restricting, are the most important point of information for our most vulnerable communities, what does that do from a psychological perspective when there's a complete over-reliance on it right now? And I'm not just talking about social media, right? I'm talking about, hey, there's no one to pick me up here after school today. Hey, mom had to take my sister to the emergency room. Who do I communicate with, right? So not just the social media part, right? The contact part. At the same time, Mr. Ritson, you've done so much, you and the team have done so much wonderful work about, and we got a presentation recently around our communications infrastructure, lifting student voice on our social media platforms. I mean, the podcast where we're featuring students. So again, big first question is, how do we juxtapose that our own district is shifting toward, lifting up these digital platforms, our social media, our communications infrastructure? I appreciate the texts, the emails, the Monday morning messages from, big shout out to the principal, my 7th grader schools. Everything that we're doing in terms of communication, and then we juxtapose that, but right, contextually, it's also the cause for our disconnect, our bullying, our learning loss, our disengagement in the classroom. So again, first, I'm gonna start with that one, Mr. Ritson. That's a lot, and it's not for us to answer, but I'm putting it out there as you're all having these conversations, because my community tells me every day the easiest way to get a hold of someone is with my phone, right? Our poorest communities were at such a structural deficit during COVID because they didn't have high-speed internet, because they were over-reliant on their personal devices. And again, there's a big implication there. Not to respond or answer, Mr. Ritson, but just kind of throwing that big first question, as everything is moving, everything we did to try to bring up those structural deficits, and now we're juxtaposing that with sort of limiting or restricting the very device that our community survived with during the worst of times just 4 years ago.
And you bring up a huge point, and I think, one, in clarifying too, that of course we are talking about phones, right, not all technology, because I mean, I remember when I was talking to senior team, we talked about that, about the reliance of technology in the world that we live in. I'm not addicted to my laptop. I'm addicted to my phone. Mm-hmm. My laptop is not designed to do that. So there needs to be ways to replace that, to utilize technology where we need to. I think the second piece of what you said too is, this is something very clear that I've said to a lot of parents. Like, it's against federal law for us to say they can't have their phone. Like, we know that, and we know this. If you have a student who has custody issues and that's their lifeline to talk to their parent or getting rides home, those things are going to still have to happen. They have to have that access. But like as Lee said, the opportunity cost and the effect of learning compared to even the benefits, can we at least build that attention sanctuary? Can we at least say, for this amount of time, you're safe from this? You're going to use it in ways that you need to. And I actually, there's some research coming out about, especially with our Black male students, are having more issues with addiction, because that are lower socioeconomically disadvantaged, because they typically only have this for their tech. They don't have laptops and stuff. And the social media companies have figured that out. So they're like, here's a demographic that we can make more addicted to this. And so that's a massive social justice issue right there. And so I don't have all the answers to what you're saying, but I do believe there is a time for us to say, maybe we had to at this time. What else can we offer and replace that's safer for our kids to be able to learn?
So in that spirit, I'm going to call in the team here. Dr. Baker's always saying, call in the team, right? Don't just make it about Claudia or Chris in this regard. You mentioned Taub. So if we're going to whatever our definition of success for this endeavor is, but if that's what we're aiming for, look, our iReady assessments are done digitally. Many of our students are doing their homework on the phone, right? Many are doing. So again, if we're thinking whether it's our equitable grading policy, whether it's how we are reimagining homework assignments, I just don't think we can have it both ways for the team, right, for the district, that this is not just about not using this device, right? Because if you're going to say to a student and to a family, it's okay to use this device when you're at home doing homework because teachers are assigning stuff that requires for you to log into Canvas or log into another platform, and those families don't have other ways to access, then we run into, again, real or perceived contradictions. Because we're saying it's okay for me to play Kahoot, and I know that's going on in classrooms, with our devices to assign assignments to require students to log in, right? To send out communications from the school, from the teachers, about field trips, about things that are coming up that week. To have it, you know, and again, I'm giving props for the communication. I'm just saying we really have to reconcile as a district that we are determining, not through policy, right, through our own practices, when it's okay and how we justify it to use the device, and then saying, but during the day in my classroom, so again, consistent, I'm gonna use the same layer for the equitable grading policy. Consistency, transparency, and fairness, right? If at any point we're gonna lead with our excellence and equity policy, this is that one, right? Because this is a huge lift. All right.
Yeah, and there's such a balance there because Lee said it best when he said it's scattershot right now, and that's the problem because that leads to inequity all the time and just confusion, lack of transparency, lack of communication. And so one of the things we've talked about in every group we've met with, I met with Talb again today, I met with them yesterday, I've been meeting with our work group and talking about there's going to have to be some differentiation within this policy, right? So when I surveyed elementary school principals versus middle and high, very different reality happening. Elementary, it's not much of an issue. Right. I mean, they don't, my kid's school said, we have an official policy. And my wife said, we have an official policy? I said, no, we're working on it. But everyone believes it because they don't have phones. It's just restriction. There's no big deal. Versus secondary and high school, where like you're seeing in secondary, where these principal leaders that are like, we've had enough. We have to do something about this because we don't have anything in place. There's two teachers at Wilson High School that I want to shout out, won't say the names, but who one of them was teaching for 28 years and she was about to quit because she couldn't handle this. Her kids were so disengaged. She would lecture and have an engaging conversation and ask the kids to share with each other, and they would have to Google the question on her PowerPoint because they weren't even paying attention because it was stolen from them. They went to their principal and said, you have to do something about this. And the principal said, I'm going to have you do it. I want you to engage your families. I want you to work together and collaborate. And they built a system to engage their families and do that just to get the parents on board. It doesn't answer everything you're saying. Of course, what are we going to do outside of school and what are those pieces? But there does have to be this uniformity. You're absolutely correct. You have teachers who went ed tech, right? When we started getting technology like Kahoot. I remember using it my final years of teaching, right? And it was like, great. Well, if you can't beat them, join it. The problem is, and Lee said it best, is opportunity cost. It's not worth the opportunity. This obsession with technology, which I know we're going to go in a circle because it's constantly evolving in here, but we have to address this. I mean, first of all, legally we have to address this. It's a law, but also it's so important. And I'm going to be very careful when I say this, but I'm going to give you an example. Many of our major big tech CEOs that have made a lot of this technology, they send their kids to Waldorf schools that don't use technology. And I'm not saying don't use technology. I use tech. My whole job. You said my whole job is technology. My team is live stream this meeting. But what message is that saying to the rest of the world? That
for our most affluent, resourced families that can send their kids to those schools. So again, I'm just sort of back up. I'd love to hear more and whatever updates and process we're going to use about how it's going at Franklin and the other schools. Because I also heard the same thing from principal at Franklin, right? While we reconcile and juxtapose what we can do and what makes sense for a district with our diversity and with our scale and size, in the midst of, we just had Dr. Salazar, and if it wasn't the last slide, it was the second to the last slide, say There's the thought exchange we really need for you to engage with our district, right? That's the part, Mr. Itzen. So that's my call to our team, to you, that I'm going to be that voice, because our most vulnerable populations are going to log into Thought Exchange with that same device, and then we have to reconcile and juxtapose where's the fairness and transparency and consistency as to what else we are overburdening our families with, while at the same time wanting the highest quality learning environment to keep our students engaged. All right. Again, not for us to resolve. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking you to answer that, but that's my call, right, to our district, that it was so vivid to me over and over again, all the intentional work that our district was doing 4 years ago to be inclusive and be accessible. I vividly remember the call of picking up so that we would have that one-to-one distribution of Chromebooks, right? Of giving the option for families to remain virtual when some families were able to come back. And that's not, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And it's these same communities then that, again, we have to be, proactively responsive to, inclusive of. And I know the team's doing the work, so it's just me that I'm going to be that guy now. If we're going to do community engagement with all these digital things and the beautiful communication that we're doing as a district, and the two-way engagement, that we have to juxtapose and reconcile that with then how we're thinking about digital education. So thank you so much. It's timely. I love that we're not just jumping on board and passing a policy. And so I'm eagerly looking forward to engaging in those conversations in person with our communities. All right, so maybe some town halls here are in the making or in the planning, in addition to maybe us as a school board can go out and talk to our communities as to what their thinking is with possible, policies and or, real-time innovation.
You want to say something, Dr. Baker?
Well, first off, thank you for the presentation. I apologize for coming in a little bit later, but one thing's for sure, the preparation and thought process into this policy has been put in. So I'm appreciative of that. The one thing that it brought me to, and this is going to be a huge tangent here, but just follow me. I can remember having a conversation with my grandmother before she passed, and she was one who was a big health nut, but she comes from the South, so she has a history in farming, a history in harvesting food, et cetera, and she was talking about the obesity problem with our kids. And she was like, do you know how we could fix that? Just make kids farm. If people produced their own food, if people went out, picked their own food, cooked their own food, it'll be healthier and it'll be better for them. But the issue is the creation of supermarkets. And we sit back and say, supermarkets? They're the best thing that ever happened. They created easy access to food. It provided, there's less people who are suffering from starvation. It's great. Of course, supermarkets are fantastic. And there's some weird parallels to where I also think about with this technology conversation. Where yes, absolutely does our communications team do a great job in sharing pieces of information. It does a great job of keeping our parents abreast of what's going on with our campuses, and it's a tool for us to get the pulse of our students from time to time with things like our pulse survey, et cetera, et cetera. But are we cutting our nose off to spite our face, right? And so that's the part where there's a real interesting conversation to be had. I think from a principle standpoint, not from a policy. And principle, because then you can build policy from that. And the one thing that I hear in the conversation that we're having is that there's a time and a place for everything. And I think that that's the piece that I was hearing in your talk, where there's a time and a place for everything. So there's a time and a place for supermarkets, and yes, our kids should know how to harvest their own food and how to farm, right? They should know the difference between Cheetos and carrots. And so I think that that's the piece that we need to really deep dive into, is really helping our parents and our students understand the importance of the value of our technology and the way that it's used, but also the time and place for everything. So.
And to both your points, the complexity drove the vision for the planning of this to take our time and not just jump into something that's ineffective and is going to end up causing harm overall. And like you said, I don't have the answer. I would get rid of social media tomorrow, and I'm your person who runs your social media, right? Because the good is wonderful. I love that our team gets to tell the rich stories. I love how our interns are so engaged in that work, and we're uplifting student voice, and that matters, and that's important, and that's not going to go away. But to your point of time and place and where it is, there has to be that line. And to Dr. Benitez, he left, but in the community engagement piece, where we go even more complex, is, and just because there's so much to talk about, and I had a short amount of time, we're going to every parent group, of course. We are holding focus groups with parents and students at the schools that we're researching. On top of the fact that we are putting together a town hall in each one of your districts that I'm going to invite you to. We just don't have it set up yet, but looking for April or May. So we've selected the high schools that we're going to use in each district, and then do a PR campaign to push out to all of the feeder schools and make it a major event. I don't know how you all are familiar, but I'm not going to get the name right, but there's a West Side community organization kind of starting with Stevens Middle School. And I got to go and present, and it was parents from different schools. It wasn't super well attended. It was maybe 30 people overall, but it was kind of a nice test. We want to do that on a grand scale and come to each of your districts and make it a community event, bring in resources like mental health services from the city, the police department, different organizations that touch this work, so that they can be there as resources for the community. And then I'm going to do a whole presentation on the impact this. And a lot of the work we're doing right now and going out and talking to families, like I said, is experimenting on like what's most impactful, because it's such a complicated issue. What can we distill down and say, this is what you definitely need to know, and here's where to go to find more information?
Well, we thank you very much. There's a lot to unpack here. Thank you for being here. But you have a comment or?
Yes, question.
Okay.
I respect and admire the dedication that you bring to this, and also the thoughtfulness, because I think at the beginning I thought we have to have a policy. Why can't we get a policy? I now understand why it's not an easy policy to get, and that it needs to be worked through. Could you go to the last page of the handout, which lists all the books and other things that, and just briefly say a little something about each of them so that people can use that as a resource?
Sure, thanks, Strato. So this is our initial resource page, and all the presentations that have gone out to schools and talked to parents and families and teachers. We've provided this. So one, and it's clickable links in the handout in the digital version. Sorry, Dr. Benitez, it's the digital version. We have our social media guide that we wrote for students and families. We're updating it right now because it's behind, because the technology has changed. And we are creating a version in Spanish as well that's happening over the next couple of months. And then that's a list of books in the center there that really all deal with the situation pretty extensively. I put The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's a social scientist out of New York University. He's kind of the prophet of this work right now. You may know who he is. He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. He's all over everywhere saying we need to do this and set guidelines. The Anxious Generation, to me, today I was talking to some teachers and they said, where would I start? What if I just wanted, this is daunting. I said, read that book. That book will tell you everything you need to know right off the bat. Everything else, if you want to go a deep dive into the legal side of it or other issues, you can, but that's a really great one. And then there's two websites, Jonathan Haidt's website and then commonsensemedia.org. That was actually started by a former CEO of big tech who feels bad about what he's done to the world. And so now there's a free website that's out there to support families and resources on how to be safe online. And it's massive. You can get lost in it. It even has like the best parental controls if you want to use the monitoring tools and all kinds of different articles and stuff. And then in the right-hand corner, there's two podcasts to click on if you want to listen to something that's just digestible. And one of them is the Ezra Klein Show, and it's called Your Mind is Being Fracked. And it's really fascinating. We talk about the attention economy and what is happening to our kids' minds and our minds all the way around. And then the top one is exciting. It's a podcast of Mr. Underwood on the EdSurge podcast. And so EdSurge is a pretty big podcast, and they had a guest on back in the summer who was talking about, no, we need to just give kids phones. It's about grit, and they had this whole thing about self-reliance, and it sounded really good, and some of the things she was saying was great. Mr. Underwood had a problem with that. And so if you know him, he's a brilliant writer, so he wrote a massive essay and sent it to the podcast host, and they were so blown away by what he said, they had him on the show. And so it's one of our very own Long Beach teachers really going deeper about the impact in his classroom. So it's just a tip of the iceberg set of resources to kind of dive in and explore that we're kind of giving out as we go through the process. And Dr. Benitez, you missed it. We are doing town halls, so I'll be in touch.
Alana?
Yeah, I just have a really quick question. I know we're a little over time, but it's quick, I promise. So from the research that you've done and the conversations that you've had with students at the schools, kind of what's the general feel or the input that you're getting from the students about the policy?
So initially, when we're talking about safety and everything, it's been a lot of ahas and wows, like they just don't understand, right? You're a kid, you're living your life and not realizing the impact. Some don't take it seriously. And Alana and I have actually had a conversation about this that's kind of funny, is one of the focus groups we did is I went to Sato, and I met with kids at Sato, and I was a focus group. So I wasn't sharing with them what I thought, what the research was saying. I was doing a focus group. It was an unbiased set of questions I developed with the research office. They talked to me about how fantastic cell phones are. They're the greatest thing in the world. They can use them for everything to communicate. It's how they take pictures of their notes. They use Slack in their ASB to communicate all day. And I so deeply wanted to say, hey, let me tell you the opportunity cost and where there's some issues with this, where Slack is low-level communication. We talk about our speaking and listening standards. You're not having rich, deep collaboration by using that. Not that those tools can be effective. So that was a challenge. And that goes back to the complexity of this, that there's going to be a lot of opinions. And we want to engage students to say, we want you to know what this is doing to you. And can we keep you safe at least this part of the day? So hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think that the education to the students is so important, because if they are to go along with this and for it to really be beneficial to them, they need to understand why it's being done and how it can benefit them. So.
Thank you for that, right? It's not just about behavior, do this because I said so. It's really getting them to see what we call trip on the truth, really to see the impact that it's having on them. And it's how it's affecting their future, right? It's keeping them from getting to where they need to do, which is a huge equity issue.
And so, okay.
I think it would be helpful to a lot of people if you took this part of the workshop, this topic, and made it available as a standalone so that people could look at it. And I bet you have the ability to do that.
I got a few people I think could take care of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that we have a student perspective, and bringing it back to having the students understand why we're looking at this and having their input is invaluable. So it is 5 minutes to 5, but we need a break because we've been in workshop for a couple of hours now, almost. So we will convene our evening meeting at 5 after.
Thank you all.
But thank you very much.